Hello, I'm David Scheinbaum from Scheinbaum and Russick. Today we'll continue the conversation about collecting. Last week I showed you one aspect of Janet's and my collection, and today, as promised, I'll kind of do part two. But I want to remind you, I talk about so many things in these talks. The first 25 weeks of the quarantine, we did a written blog, and pretty much everyone I talk about today, every movement and period, Institute of Design, the Bauhaus, metaphysical approaches to photography, there's a written blog, and I also embedded historical videos in those. And I would really encourage you, even before you watch these videos, to maybe go to our website, which is photographydealers.com, click on the History of Photography link or button there, and you'll see those first 25 blogs, which are written, but they have all of the background and history, and I think it will make these videos more sense, because I really don't have the time in the video to go into the history and all of the implications of the people I talk about. Okay, that said, the second part of our collection, and if you didn't watch part one, I showed a lot of humanistic photography and a lot of the photographers whose work we admire. This is our other passion, not only in collecting, but in a way probably maybe closer to also our own work in certain regards. It's kind of named after Myrna White's statement that we don't photograph things for what they are, but we photograph them for what else they are. Another possible title for this is making photographs, not taking photographs. So the notion of using your vision, the power of your vision to interpret what you see, that's kind of the gist of what we have in mind here. We envision a pyramid, if you will, and at the very top of that pyramid we imagine Alfred Stieglitz's equivalents. The equivalents are really important, besides being incredible photographs in their own right by Alfred Stieglitz. But the equivalent as a body of work is kind of one of the first times there's a verbalization that photography could be an abstract medium, that photographs need not be of or about something, but they could have emotional content. And Stieglitz felt very strongly, which is why he named them equivalents, that these images of clouds were equivalent to his emotional feeling at the time that he pressed the shutter. He chose a subject matter that was there for everybody, but by selecting days and times of the day and different moods, he was able to really transfer his emotions to photographic film and then, of course, photographic paper. Like his personality, many of these images are very dark. They're kind of tumultuous, but there are some light ones. There's a few hundred equivalents, but this is kind of the beginning of abstraction, or a move away from a discrete subject matter in photography. So if we see this image as a kind of the top of a pyramid, then we imagine there's kind of two sides, two slopes coming down. On one side, we see the design emphasis. We think about the Bauhaus school in Germany, the Institute of Design in Chicago, Black Mountain College. We see a whole movement in photography that, again, it's a move away from taking pictures, from subject matter, but emphasizing design. The other side of the pyramid gets a little more metaphysical in thinking about what things feel like as opposed to what they look like. But let's take this little journey together. Arthur Siegel made this photograph. He calls it a lucidogram. It's a photogram. It's actually made by placing all of these little dots, which kind of are the result of a hole punch, onto the photographic paper and passing light through it. Siegel was involved with the photography department at the Institute of Design, very influenced by the Bauhaus. He was also a teacher for a summer at Black Mountain College. But in a way, here would kind of typify moved this idea of making a photograph rather than taking a photograph. A Hungarian photographer, very influenced by the Bauhaus himself, is Yuri Kepes. Again, making these incredible abstractions filled with mystery. Not only the play of the darks and the lights, but it's no longer a question of what is that a picture of. It's really a question of what does it feel like. And this is, again, a movement that's driven by a different approach to using the photographic medium. Probably you're more familiar with these next two photographers, Harry Callahan, who starts almost going to a minimalistic place in photography, very influenced by the Institute of Design, and went on to become one of the great teachers of photography, along with his buddy Aaron Siskind, who I'll talk about in a minute. But you see, by isolating the subject matter, we're kind of not only dealing with positive and negative space, but it's the emphasis of shape and form. By the time we start looking at Aaron Siskind's work, we also start looking at the broader art world, the broader art history. Now we're thinking about the abstract expressionist movement. And we're thinking about the painters who started also to move away from a discrete subject matter and start thinking about the gesture, mark making, movement. What are those marks? What do those lines feel like? Think of the work of Franz Klein or Robert Motherwell. So when we're starting to look at, and I'm going to show you another Aaron Siskind photograph. So when we start thinking about abstract expressionism as applied to the photographic medium, there is a whole group of photographers who started to, take the rest of the art world into consideration and not just think of photography as an isolated medium. Moving to that other side of the pyramid, as I mentioned, we have a very different approach. And this is the minor white kind of side of it. And as I mentioned earlier, it's related more to the idea of things are not necessarily need to be what they are, but it's what else it is or what else they are. And trying to work in a different way. This is very influenced by, I guess I could use the word metaphysics, but it's not meant to be kind of a scary woo-woo word. But the idea of looking at other levels of consciousness, meditation, Zen, various other philosophical principles. It's a way of trying to incorporate those philosophical principles into the photographic medium. This is an interesting minor white of the feet of Tom Murphy, 1947. This is a negative print. So again, we're starting right off the bat by, not all prints need to be positives. And in Miner's case, not all photographs are even done with what we call panchromatic film. He used a lot of infrared film. He worked in a lot of methodologies that are meant to be metaphors for accessing other levels of consciousness. What does it kind of start to feel like when you go really deep inside and pull those images out? Another minor white, which might be more well known to you, this fantastic photograph on Capitol Reef. Again, what is it? It's not meant to be about what it is. It's meant to be about what do you think it is? What does it feel like? What was the photographer trying to do? This isn't done through some, crazy darkroom manipulations. It's really done through seeing and exposure and printing. And just by working in this very straightforward way and using vision to transform, that's kind of the teachings of Miner. Now Miner had two students who are very important in 20th century photography. One is Walter Chappell, Walter started by, working in this abstraction type way, working with these closed forms, concentrating on shape, playing with contrast, making these beautiful compositions. But like Minor White, who started using infrared film, and I'm sorry I don't have any examples of that to show you today, but I might embed them into this video. But, Minor's infrared work, as I said, is meant to metaphorically reach other levels of consciousness. Walter Chappell, too, he started working with a different methodology using electricity. And by using electricity, he was producing what he called metaflora photographs. And these are, in a way, they're contact prints, placing objects down on paper and using electricity. Again, please access some of our blogs. I talk about these processes in detail. But for today, just look at these images and you see the transformative nature of this photograph. And again, the technique is one that we're not familiar with. I'll go back and remind you that, again, Walter was making what I might call straight photographs that are not too different. This is just a straight photograph of, the wax that stores sometimes put on windows to block them out. To be able to, see the subject matter and photograph it within the vein of the discipline you want to pursue, but then take that further, and again, with the use of electrical energy and changing protons to photons, he's able to produce this carrot top image, which is done a totally different way. But again, it's about making this picture, not taking. This picture couldn't have been taken, had to be made. The other student of Minor's took a different direction, but staying within that same interest area as Paul Caponegro. And again, just, seeing, and I think Paul is a great example for us that, photography really is about seeing and about transforming. Of course, it could be about documenting, it could be about recording, but we don't think about those words really when we're on this side of the pyramid, so to speak. We're looking at photographers who are looking at subject matter that they could transform through the mastery of their technique. Another Paul Caponegro, imbued with mystery. I guess we could notice there's a mushroom in there, but is it a mushroom? Is it not? What's going on? This is the kind of conversation that we have with ourselves as we're looking at these photographs. And truth is, and these photographers would agree, your interpretation is the most important, in a way more than theirs. Because they're not that interested in you knowing what they're doing. They're interested in transforming a subject matter for themselves and putting it out there for you to interpret for yourself. So it's what it is to you, not really what it was to them. And you should never be kind of threatened by having to talk about photographs like this, because it really is about self-exploration. It really is about a kind of an internal dialogue. I'll end with maybe the image that, like the equivalent of Stieglitz that I started with, it's another pivotal image that could kind of define a whole approach to photography. This is called, we call it the astral apple. It's the galaxy apple. People have different names, but indeed, it's an apple transformed. It's an apple transformed into the galaxies, and it's one of the most powerful examples, one of the most powerful examples of seeing that I know of. It's a great, incredible interpretation, and it's kind of a lesson for all of us as collectors and photographers. Before I end today, these two videos are about collecting, about your collecting. I try to show you some of the things that Janet and I have interest in. Building collection, as I said in the first video, it's a reflection of you. You know, once your collection is built, and you might give it to a museum, you might leave it for your children, you might have an exhibit. It's kind of putting yourself out there, letting people know what your politics are, what your interests are. In a way, it helps define who you are in the eyes of the people who are looking at. You know, when people come to your house and for dinner and you're still puttering around in the kitchen, you know, what are your guests doing? You know, they're walking around your house or your apartment and they're looking at the walls. They're probably looking at your books on the bookshelf, but then they're looking at the walls of your house. What they see on those walls is telling them a lot about who you are. So it's an incredible thing to be able to visualize or put, you know, into a visual way your passions about life, about politics, environmental. It's a great opportunity. Andra pulled a few books from the library just to, you know, there are many books on collections, famous collections. And what's interesting about these books, you know, most of the ones we pulled are basic 20th century collections. But reading the texts on, you know, about the people or the corporations that built these collections, what were their goals? Why did they choose the works that they chose? Reading the introductions and the texts of these books is equal to just looking at the pictures. So I would encourage you to, you know, go to a library or, you know, look at, this is a catalog book of the Bank of America collection. You know, the corporation had a curator who was basically following the guidelines of the corporate folks and what kind of things they wanted to see. It's a catalog of what was the Ford Motor Company collection. Again, a great 20th century collection. Actually, there's some 19th century work in this as well. But, you know, Ford Motor Company, what was that about in relationship to photography? The text is incredibly informative. Why are these works in that collection? You've probably heard of the Sam Wagstaff collection. He's an early collector, very passionate, collected a work of a lot of the photographers who are kind of marginalized, but also a great interest in the history of photography. The story of him in collecting is a great story. But, you know, building this collection, why it was built, what it stood for in Sam's Flagstaff's eyes, incredibly important. Good friend of ours, William Hunt, Bill Hunt, he collected, this is called the unseen eye. He collected images where the eyes were closed or obscured in some way, not seen. His story is amazing, photographs are amazing. This is a very specific approach. It's a man who's collecting a very specific kind of photograph. Some people collect hands, some people collect Coca-Cola signs, some people collect things only dealing with civil rights. You know, what is your passion? What is your interest? This is kind of an interesting way for you to approach collecting. Certainly these last two videos give you a little insight into Janet's and my collection. And I think it maybe tells you a little more about who we are as both dealers and photographers. So thank you for joining us. Please go to photographydealers.com and read those blogs. Give yourself some historical foundation to understand a little more about the photographers that I spoke about today. Thanks for joining us and stay well.